I think that by this point, it is safe to say that the MechWarrior series has had one of the most complicated histories ever for a gaming franchise. By the release of its fourth mainline entry, including spin-offs, console games, and expansions, the series had a total of 7 different development studios attached to the MechWarrior name. The exact reasons for this have always varied depending on the title, and due to FASA's reluctance to allow studios or publishers to hold rights to the IP for very long. The original MechWarrior was simply supposed to be a one-off, though its continuing popularity led to a Super Nintendo remake and several overseas ports. After publishing these titles, along with MechWarrior 3050, Activision tasted blood in the water, and like the hungry sharks that they were, latched on to MechWarrior. They would use the Battletech universe to produce some of the best games ever made, even with enormous setbacks and tension spiking with FASA. Due to an agreement between FASA and a hobbled version of Microprose, which had already lost all of its original staff before being bought out by Hasbro, Zipper Interactive would be brought in to develop MechWarrior 3, as FASA saw its games development studio being bought up by Microsoft. Before that, MechWarrior 4, the game that was supposed to be MechWarrior 3 and the subject of today's video, would find its development halted due to both difficulties and this Microsoft buyout, only to be resurrected after Zipper's entry was released. Always were the games well received, with a majority of mainline titles and expansions receiving accolades such as Sci-Fi Simulation of the Year. However, with the third and fourth entries being released so close together, player fatigue would begin to set in, as 2 mainline titles and 3 expansions would hit the market in a period of 2 years. This would be shown through sales over time, but the decline would begin as soon as MechWarrior 3 hit shelves. By the beginning of the 21st century, media focusing on the real robot and mecha subgenre would fall off substantially, exiting the mainstream and becoming more of a niche topic. MechWarrior would see a couple of spin-offs until 2004, but it wouldn't be until nearly 19 years later that another mainline entry would surface. In the eyes of many, Microsoft's acquisition of FASA Interactive Technologies and the subsequent release of MechWarrior 4 Vengeance would be seen as the catalyst. Starting development before MechWarrior 3 and being shelved until FIT was in Microsoft's hands, it represents a somewhat different idea of the systems put in place by the series' third entry. Vengeance was also the first MechWarrior game to be considered completely non-canon, even with it being developed by a FASA-founded studio and containing far more of the Battletech universe's feudalistic themes. Is this true though? Was MechWarrior 4 and Microsoft's involvement so bad that it put an end to the series? Join me as I explore MechWarrior's 4th mainline entry, and we'll discover not only if this is true, but also why this game has been so polarizing to fans for so long. The clan invasion may have concluded, but chaos still engulfs the Inner Sphere. Amidst the FedCom civil war, MechWarrior 4 plunges players into an original storyline woven into the established lore. This time, you're not a nameless pilot. You step into the boots of Ian Dressari, son of Duke Eric Dressari of Kantaris 4. Opposing the newly installed Archon, Catherine Steiner Davian, and her rule over the Federated Commonwealth, Eric fuels anti-Steiner sentiment with his vocal dissonant. This draws the ire of Steiner forces, led by the ruthless Lord Marcus Roland. Roland's oppressive tactics only exacerbate the situation, fueling further resistance. Seeing an opportunity for power, Eric's nephew, William Dressari, conspires with Roland to stage a coup. For William, it's a chance to usurp his uncle and climb the power ladder. For Roland, it's a means to tighten his grip on Qatari's civilian population. Their treacherous plan succeeds, resulting in a bloody massacre that claims the lives of most of the Dressari family, including Eric. Roland installs William as the new Duke, and Steiner forces occupy the planet. However, Ian receives a final message from his father, igniting a spark of hope. With the help of his uncle Peter, he sets out to reclaim Qataris 4 and drive out the Steiner invaders.
You must be feeling in, but your father's wishes were always for honor and justice, never for revenge.
Justice? My family's been killed, Peter. All but you. Whoever killed them deserves to be dead too.
While classified as non-canon, Battletech fans will recognize familiar faces and events from the lore. Eric Dressari, Katrina Steiner-Davian, and Marcus Rowland all exist within the Battletech universe, appearing in source books, novels, and even other games. Even the coup and the Dressari family's demise are rooted in existing lore, though significantly altered or condensed for the game's narrative purposes. Much of MechWarrior 4 revolves around Ian's participation in missions designed to frustrate Marcus Rowland and ultimately confront William. While these operations might have been thrilling for players at the time, the overall narrative feels utilitarian, relying heavily on well-worn sci-fi tropes. First, the game bends existing Battletech lore to fit a familiar rebel versus oppressive empire narrative reminiscent of Star Wars. This simplified approach sacrifices the richness of the original setting for a predictable conflict. Second, the plot twist of Ian's sister, Joanna, surviving feels cliched and predictable. Similarly, the character archetypes, from the ruthless villain to the loyal companions, come across as stock figures lacking depth and originality. Once you hear a character speak, it's very easy to guess their quirk.
Okay? Are you kidding? I had to eat bugs. Okay, the green ones aren't so bad, but those little black ones,
Are you sure those were bugs?
they look like bugs.
Ian's lancemates check off all the familiar boxes. Casey, the wisecracking sidekick, Jen, the calculating technician, Jules, the stoic warrior, even the support staff falls into archetypes. Rathburn, the steely commander, and Carl, the enigmatic foreigner with unique skills.
Yes, Carl.
Good job, young Duke. Hard and fast. That's just what you needed for a mission like this one. That's how your father would have handled it.
This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Familiar tropes can provide comfort and connection. But in 2000, when shows like Farscape, Stargate SG-1, and Firefly were shaping sci-fi expectations, MechWarrior 4's characters felt derivative. They lacked the depth and quirks that made those shows sing. This makes it all the more painful when it's very obvious that this game was attempting to emulate these programs through live-action cutscenes of similar acting style and quality. Perhaps the crew would have resonated more if they interacted with the Battletech universe in more unique ways. Did Casey's humor ever clash with the seriousness of war? Did Jen's pragmatism lead to ethical dilemmas? Did Jules' gruffness mask a hidden vulnerability? Exploring these nuances could have made them feel less like borrowed characters and more like individuals navigating a complex world, especially considering that the Battletech universe is a very complex place. Even Ian's sister and uncle, Joanna and Peter, are stock. Joanna acts as the secretly alive noble working with the rebellion, whilst Peter, who is hands down the best character in the game, is expectedly killed off. As the rule goes, every character that is just too good to be true is likely to be killed off at some point or another. And if all of this sounds like spoilers, it isn't. Most of the events I'm describing happen before the end of MechWarrior 4's first act, delegating the second third of the game to villain interaction, or I suppose the best word would be villain viewing.
I made promises, Vonda.
I also know you downplayed your losses on the moon in your latest report to the Archon.
While characters like Duncan Burke, who proves to be the most enjoyable actor due to his over-the-top acting, taunt Ian during the first act,
Colonel Peter Dressari is an over-the-hill Davian desk jockey with delusions of competence. We've narrowed his location down to your current search grid. If your patrols lose him, I'll find the man or men responsible and feed them their own eyes. Do you hear me, Logan?
Yes, Commandant Burke, we will have them today.
almost all interaction is delegated to intercepted communications afterwards, showing Roland and his commanding officers bickering and infighting as Ian overtakes them. It's certainly an interesting way to tell MechWarrior 4's story, but as with the protagonists of the game, these characters are incredibly stock. I'm going to save you some time and not break down all of them, picking at just how one-dimensional these villains actually are. I'm also fully aware that gaming storylines hadn't reached the level of today's games, not yet. However, there was a lot of lore to draw from, not only from source books, but tens of novels. Microsoft dumped a lot of money when it came to obtaining FASA interactive technologies and making MechWarrior theirs as well. So was this just the extent of the writer's abilities? Or maybe, as it seems to me, the story was developed around the already existing MechWarrior 4 materials, rather than vice versa. It certainly seems like this might be the case. Nothing really gets interesting or varied till near the end of the game. For instance, out of nowhere, players can make choices that affect the storyline. Not only does this change minor events and give access to certain branching missions, but it can also give Ian a whole new lance mate, Damon Squire. The fate of certain characters can also be affected, changing the outcome of the entire game. Yet these paths are packed into MechWarrior 4's final sections, effectively burying some of its best story features. Here and there, plans for what I feel was a grander focus on player story interaction like this show. Taking certain MechWarriors on missions can result in unique dialogue between Ian, his lancemates, and Rathburn.
There's the comm array. Roger, Control. Leave cargo choppers intact.
Hey, I got a joke for you. A polar bear walks into a bar with a penguin under one arm and a 3-foot salami under the other.
Clear the comm, MechWarrior. Stand may home in on any transmission, even that joke.
Sorry, Major.
There's the comm array. Roger, Control. Leave cargo choppers intact.
Casey,
Casey here.
now that the array's down, you can probably tell that joke.
Negative, Control. It wasn't that funny anyway.
Nav point Alpha reached.
So it makes me wonder, what was the intention with MechWarrior 4's storyline truly? Like many other aspects of MechWarrior 4 Vengeance, gameplay remains a hotly debated topic within the Battletech and MechWarrior communities. It's hard to navigate any discussion about the series without encountering the pervasive sentiment that MechWarrior 4 is somehow inferior in all respects. While undeniably issues exist, I find myself firmly on the other side of the fence. Not entirely, mind you, but firmly enough to warrant a closer look.
Warning, heat exceeding recommended level. Warning, approaching critical heat level.
MechWarrior 4 presents a far more challenging experience than its predecessors. Every iteration of the franchise has been susceptible to exploits, and MechWarrior 3, despite its cherished status, was no exception. Leg targeting offered a breezy path through the game. Well, except for Pirate's Moon, that expansion was brutal and a significant contributor to this review's delayed arrival. MechWarrior 4, however, appears deliberately designed to address these exploits, demanding a more strategic and tactical approach from the player. However, these changes come with a few trade-offs. The most impactful change in MechWarrior 4 is arguably the neutering of the mech lab. Gone are the days of stripping down and redesigning mechs solely based on tonnage limitations. Each battle mech now boasts a set number of slots, each designated by color for specific weapon types. While this iteration undoubtedly caters to newcomers, offering a more accessible entry point, it comes at a steep cost. Completely removing full customization, a series staple for 5 years, feels like a major misstep. Preset configurations already existed to ease the learning curve for new players, and the color slot system significantly diminishes the value of salvaged parts, as most can no longer be utilized in the same way that they were in previous titles with the same feature. MechWarrior 2 and 3 offer players the ability to damage or even remove specific mech parts. While parts can still be destroyed in MechWarrior 4, they remain attached to the body, rendering them inoperable at best. Notably, even when rendered non-functional, legs retain their functionality, requiring both legs to be destroyed for a mech to fall. Initially, this change filled me with a sense of resentment, as it effectively undermined the strategies I had honed throughout the series. However, looking back at MechWarrior 3, I readily acknowledged succumbing to a sense of boredom with combat due to the dominant strategy of targeting enemy legs, so long as I had sufficient heat sinks and PPCs. MechWarrior 4, by forcing me to adapt and approach encounters more strategically, ultimately resulted in greater variety when utilizing different battle mechs and exploring their diverse capabilities. While I do feel that this mech lab is pretty much unacceptable, it does contribute to each battle mech having a more unique feel. A few other seething issues crop up as well. Water no longer cools a battle mech down when it's standing in a river, lake, or alongside a shoreline. Enemy AI will sometimes randomly stop or can't understand what to do when a player is standing still. And don't even get me started on how watered down PPCs are now. Thankfully, there are a few positive trade-offs. Primarily, the Lancemate system has been vastly improved. With the story revolving heavily around the connection between Ian and his Lancemates, it seems like the developers wanted to incorporate this into the gameplay. Now the keyboard F row can be used to perform a series of straightforward commands that can add a lot of variety to gameplay if used creatively. Regarding physical controls, MechWarrior 4 retains the series' signature keyboard-based control scheme for piloting battle mechs. Interestingly, the default setting disables mouse functionality, although it can be easily re-enabled through the options menu. This curious omission is particularly baffling considering mouse support existed as far back as MechWarrior 2 in 1995, at least by default. Even with comfortable control settings, however, MechWarrior 4 lacks free aim functionality, marking a step back for fans of MechWarrior 3. Of course, viewers have long told me that using a PC joystick is the way to go. So for this review, I actually picked up the Logitech Extreme 3D Pro. While it certainly was a novelistic experience, I wouldn't say that it was the end-all way to play a MechWarrior game. There is a high degree of finesse and learning that comes with playing games this way, and I certainly wasn't able to achieve it in the 10 or so hours I played MechWarrior 4. It does lend to a more simulation sort of feeling though, and I think there's a lot of value in that. Often, MechWarrior 4 is said to have a more cartoony quality to its graphics. I understand what players are trying to say, as battle mechs now have a more bouncy feeling to their animations, yet it isn't a look that pushes the game into cartoony territory. Quite simply, MechWarrior 4 feels like it was part of that bygone trend of upping polygonal counts to compete with other games visually. Anyone playing games on PC or console in the early 2000s knows exactly what I mean. There was a brief obsession with polygonal counts that led to a slew of these bouncy looking games, and a groundbreaking amount of unrealistic breast physics. If you're familiar with the FMV craze that peaked with the original PlayStation, then it's basically that, just with polygon counts. By default, there are 21 battle mechs in MechWarrior 4. Not a single one of them captured the same gritty character as any of the prior games. While not cartoony, Vengeance is guilty of being a little too clean, especially since most of the battle mechs being used by Ian and his Lancemates are salvaged on the battlefield. Selection leans heavily towards light or mid-class mechs for nearly half of the campaign, with the former appearing a bit too frequently. By Operation 4, I was bored battling mostly Cougars, Ravens, and Shadowcats. It took far too long for models like the Argus, Mad Cat, and Mauler to show up. A strange choice in appearance order considering Vengeance's roster is otherwise filled with heavy and assault mechs. Two add-on CDs, the Inner Sphere and Clan Invasion packs, were later released, introducing iconic mechs like the Zeus, Hunchback, Highlander, Cauldronborn, and Kodiak, along with new maps and components. Their absence from the base game feels like a missed opportunity, perhaps even a Microsoft cash grab. Actually, probably definitely a Microsoft cash grab. It's ultimately disappointing that you can't use these in the single-player campaign, or even explore the new maps outside of instant action or online play. It's painfully obvious that there's been a massive graphical downgrade when it comes to showing damage. Sure, mechs still limp when they're crippled, spewing smoke and sparks, but components don't break off as they used to. It's a bizarre oversight when nearly every other MechWarrior game has nailed this. Instead, some dinky corner indicator tells us a part's dead. How thrilling. And worse, our mechs end up plastered with giant black smudges. It's admittedly lazy and downright amateurish. Environments in MechWarrior 4 are decent considering the game's limited setting. Kantara's surface isn't visually stunning, featuring mostly familiar forests, coasts, and deserts. Aside from the opening operation on Kantara's moon with its more alien feel, these zones can become really repetitive. Still, care has been taken to make them feel more natural. Trees grow, animals roam, and birds take flight. Snow zones show hints of greenery peeking through, suggesting seasonal thaws. Militarized areas feature workers scrambling to avoid your mech, a touch seen only a handful of times in MechWarrior 3, though there they were rendered in 3D rather than being 2D sprites. And desert areas, well, they're predictably sandy, a staple as common as sewers in first-person shooters. It's doubtful that any future MechWarrior game will rival the haunting brilliance of MechWarrior 2's score, especially since the first game had a single track and MechWarrior 3 only had 2 for missions. That leaves MechWarrior 4 the undisputed silver medalist in the soundtrack battle. But let's be real, that medal was handed out with no real competitors around at this point, at least not for a mainline entry. Forget anything resembling previous soundtracks. Just like its storytelling, MechWarrior 4's score takes a page from classic sci-fi shows. Star Trek, Stargate, heck, even the good season of Andromeda. It's less atmospheric dread and more orchestral fanfare. Maybe I prefer the grim ambience of old, but here's the thing. This is the inner sphere, not clan territory. Here, things are a bit more civilized, less bleak. There's room for individualism, even heroism. For one side at least. That triumphant sound, perfect when you're blasting mechs across the battlefield. It took me a long time to pinpoint what exactly to say about this game. Did MechWarrior 4 destroy the series? No, I don't think so, but I don't think it was the greatest game in the series, not by far. When MechWarrior 3 was released, it was highly rated, but there were already talks about the mech genre starting to fall off. Sales weren't as great as anyone predicted, not with that game. So when MechWarrior 4 was released merely a year later, it surely suffered due to the market status at the time. In the years following MechWarrior 4's release and its expansions, Microsoft would push the series in a more action-oriented direction. This wouldn't be the worst thing, not by any means. However, the Mech Assault series just wouldn't hit as hard as they wanted. For whatever reason, the series would just sit quietly until PGI reacquired the IP. Even then, the feeling of MechWarrior would be severely diminished. However, that's a subject for another video entirely. So, what did you think of MechWarrior 4? Are you a veteran of the series or someone that began with the title? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.